Welcome, everyone, to another webinar from the DX community. Today we have Michael Andrews talking about multi-source content and swappable UIs using JSON Schema. I know you've been pretty excited about this, Michael, so I can't wait to see all the wonderful things you're going to throw at us. And then I'll keep an eye on any questions coming in, and then we'll address them towards the end. So all yours.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Akshay, for hosting me, and to the DX community, experience community. For those of you who aren't a member of this community, it's a great community, some great people who contribute their insights, and so I encourage you to join that. I'm going to be talking about some broad trends that are happening in digital experience right now, where we are seeing lots of activity across enterprises, with content being developed in different places and experiences being developed in different places, and how we can start to unify these things using something called JSON Schema. For those of you who don't know me already, I'm Michael Andrews. I'm a content architect and a content strategist, and I have a lot of experience over the past, say, 5 years with headless content management, thinking about how to make content more modular, how to make designs more modular, and specifically how to get these things to work together. I'm a huge advocate of standards, and I've written a couple of books about content metadata. You can find those on Amazon if you're interested. And if I talk about anything today you think that I could help your organization with, I am open to consulting or even full-time roles. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you're not already, and feel free to check out my blog, Story Needle. We're going to be talking about a pretty broad range of things, both content and design, and in introducing something that's not going to be so familiar to a lot of you, which is JSON Schema. So I have a lot of material I'm going to cover, and feel relaxed about this. I know I'm going to be talking to people with different levels of experience. Some people are technical, some people are not technical. I'm going to really try my best to address both these groups because I feel it's so important for them to have some common understanding. But this is being recorded, so if I say something too quickly for you, you'll have a chance to review it. And as Akshay said, we'll be having some questions at the end, so I can elaborate on things or clarify anything I talk about. We're going to start by talking about the context, some of the trends that are going on, and especially for content and UX folks. And I'm going to go into authoring a good bit, because authoring is happening across organizations, and how can we help govern authoring better. I'll introduce JSON Schema to folks, what it is, what it can do for us, and then I will address how we can also use this to connect our modular content to our modular design. So the context is, in the technical space of digital experience, there are a number of trends happening. They go by the names of composability, decoupling, federation. The general thrust of all these trends is that we're looking for ways to connect together different systems and tools and make them coordinate with one another. And this is really exciting. It promises us the possibility of having more specialized tools that can do certain things better. We're trying to break down some technical silos here. But the reality is, for the folks who aren't technical, is that some of this is a little disappointing. And I just wrote an article this week in CMS Wire, sort of talking about how a lot non-technical people will feel kind of left behind by these trends. So there's some interesting things we can do, but for the non-technical end users, we find that things are just still very stovepiped, and that people are trying to connect things by forcing people to use particular tools, particular solutions, rather than giving them a choice about what they need for their own needs. And we see this a lot in authoring. So authoring is actually a very messy process. It happens throughout organizations, and oftentimes people who develop solutions come up with sort of an idealized version of how authoring occurs. The reality is that we have authoring happening across organizations. I call it multi-source authoring. So it's many places contributing content, contributing information. It's distributed. So the myth is that there's sort of one CMS that can solve all your problems, and that all authors are going to be centralized using the CMS, and that everyone even can use the same tool. Some people are talking about a universal editor, for example. And generally, these are being supported by some sort of idea that there's a marketer and they need to create a a landing page, and that's how this is all being tailored for. But really, in organizations, the reality is much more complex than that. Sure, there are marketers creating landing pages, but there are many other kinds of people developing content. And some of them are just occasional contributors of content. Some of them have full-time responsibilities. And this is happening throughout the organization, not just marketing content, but also support content, knowledge bases, internal content, all these things. And people are using multiple CMSs. They're sometimes using things that aren't even CMSs. And we need a way to govern this, because we have to figure out what all this is and how it's meant to work together. So this is a simplified view of how authoring is occurring in organizations. You have different teams, they're using different CMSs. You have parties that aren't even using a CMS. So they may be other employees or partners who maybe have to go to a web portal and submit some information or content. We even ask customers to submit things to us. We give them forms, for example. And unless we really govern this and know what all this is that's being contributed, and we have some guardrails on it, the quality of this is at stake. And this is really important because we need all these pieces to work together and be verifiable. And right now we're kind of shuffling these things between different touch points using APIs. And it's not a very elegant process sometimes. And sometimes you create a way of doing this that builds up some technical debt. Someone was mentioning recently about middleware lock-in, where you're just trying to get things between these different systems, and it's you're kind of creating another issue that you have to manage there. What we're missing is that we don't have our content defined in one place, and this is causing interoperability problems. So every time we have this content in different systems being submitted on different touch points, we are defining the characteristics of that content locally. So each CMS has its own content model. That web portal has its own page template. The customer's form is its own JavaScript form. And these things are not working off of a common definition. Now, we need a way to come up with a way to standardize how we're defining our content. And this is a problem. It's affecting interoperability. And there are organizations that are promoting the idea of composability and federation and things like that. One of them is this organization called the Mock Alliance. And they're just this year starting to really recognize the need for interoperability standards. Now, they're starting to do some work on this, which is great. I think it's going to be a big benefit to making this all be smoother for everyone. But for the moment, looks like they're focusing more on technical interoperability rather than content interoperability. So I think we need a solution that can start to address the needs of content and UX folks. And the good news is that we don't need a committee to develop a new standard to do this. We have existing standards that we can use today to solve this problem. And what we want to do is take this notion of decoupling and apply it to how we define our content. So traditionally, we have defined our content model in the CMS. And by decoupling our content model, we separate the content model from the CMS. The CMS implements the content model, but it doesn't define the content model. So the content model becomes independent. Our content architecture is not defined by a single CMS. It exists separately from it. And we are abstracting the definition of the content from its implementation in a CMS. And we can do this by developing what's called a schema registry. And this is something that you can access through a URI. Any touch point that needs to know what that content is, how it's defined, is able to access the schema registry through a URI and find that out. So this is how it works. We have then the ability, by defining the content model outside of any one system, the ability to govern all of our systems because we have this external definition, this schema that's defining what all the content is about. And we have a common set of specifications, validations, and we can use this external registry to supply whatever amount of definition we need for the group of people or individual who is using it. So we can tailor this. One team may need the entire content model to do their work. Other teams may be working on very specialized content and only need a part of that model. And we can scale that down even to the individual customer who's just filling out a form, and all they need is a single content type from that larger content model. So this gives us a lot of scalability and also provides governance across these different touch points that people are contributing content to. And this gives us the ability to make our authoring environment more adaptive. So we have people whose full-time responsibility is content. They need everything, right? They need to know all the content that's there, the inventory, how these pieces work together, workflows, being able to schedule publishing. They get all that. And then we have people who have much more narrow needs. They're just an occasional contributor. They don't need workflows. They don't need to worry about when the stuff's getting scheduled. They just need to submit it. And we can start adapting the content authoring environment to the needs of the individual user role. So rather than expecting everyone's going to use one common authoring environment, which is sort of the way a lot of people are promoting things, we are tailoring the authoring environment to the needs of the individual. The benefits of this approach are several. One is that, as I said, our content model is independent of our CMS. We've decoupled it. We've enabled this interoperability. We can deploy our content types wherever they're needed. So it's adaptive. Our content structure is portable now. We can use as much or as little of it as we need. And importantly, and this is something that isn't really possible today, is that we can build our content model up from the ground up. So traditionally, the content model has been very much of a centralized process of committee deciding for the whole organization what needs to be in place, and then pushing it down on the organization. Now, with a federated system where you can have different parts of the organization developing specific content types and contributing it to the schema registry, is empowering teams to define the content that they are creating and then sharing that definition with the rest of the organization so that the rest of the organization knows what's there and understands how it can be used. So really, really beneficial capability here. So how do we do this? This is where JSON Schema comes into play. Now, JSON Schema is something that's not well known in the content community or in the design community, but it is something that has been widely used. It's quite mature, been around for about 10 years at least, and is evolved over time. It's basically a port to JSON of the XML schema definition language that has a long history to it and has supported content sort of in the pre-API era. JSON is the lingua franca of the web, is how content gets moved around on the web. And the problem we've had until now is that different parties haven't really been able to understand what these pieces moving around are about. And that's been a big pain point. So JSON Schema gives us a way to define all this content wherever it's being produced in the organization or whoever needs to use it. Some big names using JSON Schema today. It's widely used to support APIs, things like OpenAPI or Swagger based on JSON Schema. So there's a lot of backing to it, and there's a great ecosystem around it. What it does for us is it gives us a way to define our content without relying on custom code. And this is going to be a huge benefit to developers, but it also simplifies things for non-developers. So we now have to rely on a lot of custom code to do the validations of things, and we can use JSON Schema to define what the content needs to be there, what format it needs to be in, and so on. And it prevents errors and makes sure that the right content is available. And it also gives us a common language throughout the whole organization to say what is there and how it can be used. So it's going to enable better collaboration across the organization. So I'm going to give you a very quick tour of JSON Schema's functionality, how it looks like, what you can do with it. I'm going to show some examples I've found from different documentation. I just want to caution that these are just to illustrate the features. I'm not giving you right now a tutorial on content modeling. That's sort of a separate conversation, and I'm obviously, if your organization needs help on that, I'm happy to be hired to help you out on that. But for today, I'm just going to be talking about JSON Schema and the features of it and how we can use it. And I'm going to start by showing a content type for a blog post. And this actually comes from a CMS vendor who is using JSON Schema already. Now, blog post is a very simple content type, and this is going to be a very simple example to get it started. I'm showing it diagrammatically to sort of remove the noise of the syntax here. Hopefully, everyone can follow along, both the technical people and the non-technical people alike. On the left here, we have some keywords in bold here. We're starting off with the $sign schema, and that's basically telling us that we're following JSON Schema. All the rules come from this URI listed here for the jasonschema.org. Below that, we have an ID, and this is declaring our content type. So we're saying this is a content type for a blog post. We have another pointer here to a reference. This is what this particular CMS has some additional validations that they've developed. I'll tell you a little bit more about how that works later on. And then we have under this the properties and what's required. So we have three properties, title, author, and description. We can see that all three of these are required. And then we can see that all three of the properties are strings as we move across to the right, and that one of the properties has a character limit of 50 characters. So this is really simple. I promise you can do a lot more with JSON Schema than this, but I just wanted to start you off with a simple example to give you a sense of what's available out of the box from JSON Schema. And you can do a lot with it out of the box. It's extensible, so it has a lot of sub-vocabularies to it that help you define connections between different things, set the logic for different things, validate your properties, add metadata and annotations, and indicate media types. And one of the really beneficial things about JSON Schema is that you are in no way limited to what's out of the box, even though a lot of things are very helpful out of the box that they have there. So here we see a a schema that includes something that the publisher themselves has developed, where they're extending the schema to include things of their own. So we have two vocabularies here, the JSON schema's core vocabulary and the company's own example.com vocabulary. Both of these things are there. So you can build these and layer them and use which things you need at different times. Another thing I can just call out here is one of the keywords. It says all of. This is a composition keyword. You have things like all of, or any of, or one of, or not. And you can start to build up what you need and use this, again, without having to use any custom code for this. Now, one of the things that JSON Schema allows you to do is very critical to content modeling, and that's to reference other content types. And this is how we start to build content modularity. So this example here, we have the ID is for a customer, so it's a customer content type. And the properties relate to the first and last names, as well as a couple of addresses for billing and for shipping. Now, what we're doing in this example is that we are referencing other things. So in the names, we're defining the characteristics of the name locally. And at the bottom here, we can see what that local definition is, that the name is a string. Pretty simple, but you could make that more complicated if you need to. And then we have the shipping address and billing address. And these are referenced to a separate schema for address. So you have another content type for address. And this is classic content modeling here, where we're taking something and then we're connecting it to something else that maybe is more specialized. And we're building this structural hierarchy, which is what we want to do in content modeling. And JSON Schema is supporting that brilliantly. We have a lot of properties in JSON Schema that can specify rules for which properties to use. So I've mentioned some of the keywords, all of, any of, but we also have logic like if, then, else, things like that. So again, you don't need custom code. You can just use JSON Schema to supply these kinds of rules for you. And we have a lot of keywords that relate to specifying which properties are needed or which values, how values need to be validated. On the far right here, we have a list of some of these that are used. We can do it for numbers, for different content types, for arrays. All these things are possible. And these include things like enumerated values. So you could just build in your taxonomy values into this, constant values, regular expressions if you needed to validate particular patterns, and so on and so forth. So a lot of different options here that you're able to use to build your content types and your content model from these properties. Also, formats are very well supported in JSON Schema. So we have in the red here, we have all these different kinds of formats that are available out of the box. You can have these, use these as they are. And if you need something else, you can define it on your own. So something like geolocation data isn't here. I think probably because there's no single standard for geolocation data. Some people use decimal systems, some people use minutes and seconds. So you would define it how you wanted to use it yourself, and then it would just be part of your schema. Reuse. So reuse is enabled through references to items or to schemas. And JSON Schema has some really good support for resource identifiers. So we have things already mentioned, URIs, but we also have support for UUIDs. This is great if you're needing to track things like specific items, specific versions, even specific transactions. I mean, you could even put a blockchain transaction string in here. And if you're doing international work and needing to use Unicode characters, it has support for IRIs as well. So this is, again, just available out of the box and very, very helpful. We have the ability with JSON Schema not only to extend it ourselves, but to incorporate other people's schemas. So the concept of an external registry applies to having common registries. And so there's something called the JSON Schema Store, which has over 900 different JSON schemas that you're free to use if there's something there that is of use to you. And similarly, you can contribute your own schemas to this if you want to encourage other people to be using your schemas. So it really is great. It helps to facilitate the use of things and lessen the burden of development for everyone by having this sort of culture of sharing these things across different organizations. One of the very helpful features of JSON Schema is the ability to add internal metadata. And on the left here, we see some of the keywords that you can use for internal metadata. You can add descriptions, you can add examples, you can indicate if something is read-only, for example, as well. And what this allows you to do is to really explicate what your content types are about. One of the biggest problems that organizations face when they're developing a content model is maybe people don't understand, what how something's supposed to be used, what something means. Very common to have field names be a little ambiguous. They need to have some further explanation to give people a sense of how am I supposed to use this? What sort of restrictions might there be on this? And you can use the descriptions and the examples to put that into your content model and then surface it where it's needed. So for example, you can surface this into the authoring UI so that people can see, examples of something if they're trying to create something. And you can also easily pull this into your API documentation. JSON Schema has tools that allow you to pull this stuff out very easily. And so, for example, if you have some people in your organization who do command line work with your content, maybe doing batch work, and they need to understand, am I pulling in the right field here? How's this supposed to be used? This can help them discover that and be able to use things correctly. So here we have an example of just how adding a description to the content model helps a lot. So we are adding a content type description over on the left here. This is for a product content type, and we can see it's specifically for Acme's catalog, as opposed to maybe some other brand's catalog. And then we have different, properties. These tend to have the, camel case names. Sometimes they're a little cryptic. We're not really sure what they're supposed to be. So you can add descriptions there and figure out what these are meant to be used for. So again, very useful for disambiguating and articulating the purpose of what each part of your content model is supposed to be doing. Mentioned this a little bit already, but it's just so important for people who are used to thinking about developing custom code is that you're able to bypass that by using JSON Schema, because you have the ability to set conditional logic within the schema itself. So here we see an example of, on the left side, of if, then, else logic. We're applying this to a street address. So we have a country. We can define the default for the country as the United States, but by using the enumeration property there, we can show which values are allowed. So it's the US and Canada in this particular example. Now, the US and Canada have different postal systems, and we need to accommodate that. So we look at what the country is, and if it's the US, then we apply a US style of postal code validation. The US system is all numbers. So we have this regex pattern there, and we can validate that against the US postal format. Um, Else, if it's Canada, then we have an alphanumeric pattern that we validate against. So we build this right into the schema, and we're showing only what people need to see. So this is something that is, again, a pain point with a lot of content models where people get the whole kitchen sink at once because someone might need something, but we can now only expose the pieces that people need. And so there are other kinds of conditionals we can use to do that. There are dependent properties keyword, and there's even a dependent schema keyword where you are able to, all right, if someone needs that, then you expose the other content type that they need to fill in. So you build this in and help to simplify things for people as they're producing it. I mentioned a little bit about the ecosystem around JSON schema, and I just want to share a couple of examples of that. This is from something called React JSON Schema Form. I'm not a front-end developer. I don't have any particular favoritism towards React or something else, but I'm sharing this because it's, I think a really good example of how people are using JSON schema now. So they have a form you can use to build a schema. And so this is allowing people to sort of a low-code way to build JSON schema types. And we can see that this is the only real code I'm going to show you today, but we can see at the top here, we have the JSON schema being developed, but we also have the ability to generate a UI schema from this. And this is something then that you can connect with how you would be presenting this to people. And you can easily build forms from JSON schema. So it works both ways. You can use forms to build schemas, and you can use forms. You can use schemas to build forms and forms to build schemas. It works both ways. So here we have a different project called JSON Forms, which can take JSON schemas and produce pretty quickly UIs from them. So here we have a stepper, multi-step process, and you can generate this UI directly from your JSON schema. One other thing I wanted to share with you, because I really am excited about how this is lowering the barriers for non-technical people to understand the details of schemas and the details of content models. We see some commercial products which have visual editors that let you create JSON schemas. And these are two examples here, fairly similar in what they do, but you are working in much more of a diagrammatic mode, building with boxes, seeing the modularity there, and building out the connections and the details. And this is going to be a big help for whatever your role is. If you're a content person or a UX person or a developer or just someone who works with a business stakeholder, this can really help facilitate the conversations that you have and enable you to get alignment about what's there, make sure you're not missing things, and help facilitate this so that it's easier to implement. So I'm really excited about what JSON schema can do to define our content and how it can support authors. But I'm also excited about what it can do to support people in UX who are trying to define the front end. And they're working with things like design systems, or they're trying to think about the customer UI, because I think JSON schema has an incredibly useful role to play in that domain as well. Now, design systems have really taken off over the past decade, and I think they're solving some of the same problems that content modeling are solving, except in the design domain. So they're about making our UI modular, just as the content modeling is about making our content model modular, our design systems are making the UI modular. And these UI components host a lot of content. So we find that design systems really have different levels of granularity to them. We have on the left, we have fields and values. In the middle, we have some simple widgets, and then on the far right, we have UI components that are more sophisticated. They have multiple parts to them. So UI components have modularity, and you can take a button, for example, and incorporate it in a dialogue, and then incorporate that dialogue into something like a coach mark or a product tour. That's how design systems work, and they are really in intent very similar to how we define our content in a content model. But it's really important to recognize, though, that while they're similar in that they're both modular, they're different modules, right? So the modular content is really about the structure of the content, what content elements are expected, and can we reuse content instances? Whereas with the design system, we're looking at the structure of the design, what are the expected design elements, and trying to reuse things like design styles and themes. So they both start from very granular pieces and roll up into more sophisticated pieces, but they're rolling up differently. They're not really the same thing. And the fields, for example, aren't aligned, and that's perfectly all right. This is separation of concerns, and it's a good thing. I know a lot of people struggle with this, but it's a very good thing. We want to enable this. We have differences in terminology. We have things in our content types that aren't important to the UI design. We have things in our design system and our UI components that our content doesn't care about. And this is because they have different responsibilities. And it's fine, but for a lot of people, it causes a bit of anguish, like how do these things relate to one another? And the relationship is one where we need some rules. So we need to take our structured content and be able to map it to our UI components. Now on the left, we have our sort of classic situation. So when people talk about decoupling, this is often what they think about. We have some content here, and we need to be able to give it different presentations. Maybe they're going to be thematically look different. Maybe it's just different sizes for different devices, whatever it is. And that's not too complicated to do. Even CSS can manage a lot of these types of things. But we get on the right a different situation that actually is much more complex, but much more interesting. So on the right side, we have many different kinds of content, not just one type of content. And we have many presentations. And we need to think about what the relationship is between the content and the presentations in this situation. So we might have these different kinds of content all being displayed in a common way. We may need some of these different kinds of content to be displayed in unique ways. We might want the option to change how things are displayed. Lots of different contingencies can arise here. And this is where we really get to the heart of decoupling, I feel. So it's not just about the front end and the back end. I mean, that's certainly a consequence of this. And there are other technical reasons why you want to separate your front end and the back end. But from a content and UX point of view, the real goal here is to separate the content from the design. So we have independence between the content and design. And our presentation's not defining the content. And specifically, we're trying to keep code out of our content. And this really is sometimes something that people balk at. They're like, what do you mean keep code out of content? But with JSON Schema, we have the ability to do this. And when we do this, our core content can be delivered across channels easily. Not all content works across all channels, but our core content has this ability to do that. And we have the flexibility of changing our design without breaking our content, or changing our content without breaking our design. And that's really important because we want that flexibility. Now, I see a lot of anti-patterns where people imagine that they're decoupling their content and their design, but they're really not. The first example I see is where people are putting presentation parameters in their content type. So they've made an assumption about how that content's going to appear when they do that. And it's harder to change after that, after you start wiring it into your content. So just to give you a simple example, I've seen actually a vendor put as part of their out-of-the-box content model color into content types. Doesn't belong there. The other thing I see is the reverse, where people are relying on UI components to define their content. And they make this assumption that the content's always going to appear a certain way, so therefore the structure just needs to be exactly how it would appear. And that is maybe a appealing assumption when you're first building something out, but after a few months, already you'll start to break that assumption. So it's not a good thing to do. Let me explain a little bit more about why content and design components need to be independent from each other. This is going to be familiar to some of you, but it's really important to stress this because I find again and again people make this assumption that there's a one-to-one relationship between a content type and a design component. So we can have a very simple content type like a question and answer, and we can display that multiple ways. So we might display it in an accordion, and maybe that's how you want that to show up on a FAQ page if you have one. But maybe you want your internal team to really understand the answer. So you've set up some flashcards for them, where on the front you have the question, and on the back you have the answer. And so that's a different application of that. And then maybe later on you decide you want to put those in a chat bot. You get the flexibility to do that when you have your content and design separated. And conversely, that accordion can host different kinds of content. So it can host the question and answer, but it also might host a term and a definition. And so while we may find that there's a tendency to associate a particular content type with a particular design component, it's not a permanent marriage. And we need to have the flexibility to change our mind, to do things and make both our content and our design system work harder for us, which we can do when they're really decoupled. Now, I've shown you the example of a many-to-many relationship between content types and UI components, but it's more important than that. If this was the only thing that decoupling did for us, it's interesting, but so what in a way, but really what we're talking about here is variable content. And there are many ways you can vary your content. You can change the whole content type, obviously, but you may be filtering part of your content type where you're only pulling out certain fields, or extracting across different items and merging those into a particular UI component. We see more examples increasingly as we're relying more on APIs to deliver content, of transforming our content on the fly. Seeing this a lot in images where you're doing on the fly crops or on the fly backgrounds or overlays, but even text content can be transformed on the fly. And then ultimately, we're trying with decoupling to support orchestration, where we're getting very context-driven decisions about what content elements to pull from what sources and how to display those in different contexts. So these are all possible when and only when you truly decouple your content from your design. All right, so a lot about the importance of that. Now, how do we actually enable this though? And again, JSON Schema gives us the tools to do this. I'm going to give you a quote here from someone I've recently met online named Jonas Ulrich. He's with a company called Kickstart DS. I think DS stands for Design System. And he says that we're looking to decouple our design system from how it's implemented. And when we do this, we have our design system defined as explicit rules, and we get the flexibility of being able to use it independent of specific implementations. And this is brilliant because it really enables us to change our designs much more easily. And I'm seeing evidence that JSON Schema is getting noticed in the design system world. So this is a couple screenshots from an organization called OpenUI. It's a W3C community. And what they do is they are surveying all of the openly published design systems that organizations have put out there and starting to see what commonalities there are, trying to standardize nomenclature for these different UI components, behaviors, things like that. And they're encouraging people to submit design systems using JSON Schema. So still early days on this, but I'm starting to see this evidence of people in the design systems community embracing JSON Schema. Now, how will this work? I'm going to show you an example here. This comes from the Kickstart DS folks of a box UI component. And as it says on the box, it's just a box. That's all it does. But it holds some content. It needs some styling, things like that. So on the far left, we see it's a box. The box has some things associated with it. Also has an image. So the box has a headline, has some text. We see some alignment properties there. The text then is broken down and has some styling associated with it, alignment on the headline. There's a link also in there, and that has its own things like labeling and, again, styling and things like that. So we're breaking all these things out, expressing them as JSON Schema. The image is also there. This is not a complete, it's just a fragment. We're not actually identifying this box with an ID, for example. But you get the idea of how you can break these things out, and then you're able to modularize these things if you give them unique IDs and reuse parts of them, pull them together, and come up with different variations that you can use. All this is possible without even putting this into a specific implementation yet. So you get a lot of freedom here to reuse things across your different touch points as and when you need them. So the content model in JSON Schema, the design system in JSON Schema, and ultimately, I think we have the opportunity to connect these things together in JSON Schema definitions as well. So we have the content types defined in JSON Schema. We need to map them to our UI components, which are also defined in JSON Schema. So we need to tell what types belong, which components, which fields belong to which UI elements, indicating what's allowed, what's disallowed. JSON Schema allows us to make these definitions. We even have the opportunity to compare the dimensions of images or the lengths of fields for both our content and our UI components, and to make sure that they match up well, so we don't have anyone trying to use things in the wrong way and having some bad consequences from that. So just to recap it a bit, JSON schema can be used to define our content types anywhere in our organization. It's not dependent on any one system that you're using. You can define your content types in this external registry for whatever applications you have. And this gives you the ability to start small and use it where it makes sense already, and then roll it out wherever else it might be useful. It is mature, even if you're not familiar with it. I promise you, a lot of people have been working on it a good long while, and so it has great support and a good ecosystem developing around it. And it can also be used for our design components as well. So this really can empower teams of any size to build rule-based modularity for digital experiences. And it keeps getting better. I mean, so just this week, OpenAI has announced that they're supporting JSON schema. And so imagine this, you're able to take some unstructured text, OpenAI, you can ask using OpenAI some questions about it, and it can pull out information in a formal schema, formally defined JSON schema. And I haven't tried this out myself yet, but the early word on it is that it's quite an impressive capability. So I'm not specifically promoting this, but I'm excited to see just all the different ways that we are seeing JSON schema being embraced by organizations. And with that, I've covered a lot of material. Maybe some of you folks have questions, but before I get there, just if you want to learn more about JSON schema, a couple resources. The one on the left is a free ebook from the jasonschema.org website. You can download that. The book on the right is a brand new book by Ron Edelman and Juan Cruz Voeti, Unifying Business Data and Code, Designing Data Products with JSON Schema. Excellent book. It's great for learning JSON schema, but there are also some just great insights in how to think about planning things, working with stakeholders. All that good material is covered in there, so I highly recommend it. So, opening it up for questions, and if Akshay wants to come back online, I'll be
Sure.
happy to chat with
Yeah.
you if anyone has anything.
Yeah, no worries. So I know you were busy explaining to us all the things. We do have a question. So where do you see schema.org vocabularies, definitions, and even model in that assemblage you presented is the question.
Sure. That's a great question. And it's not the first time this question has come up. So the best answer I'll give you is someone has written a very detailed blog post about this. So if you just really were to type in JSON schema, schema.org, and I think they even threw in JSON LD into that, one particular blog post will come up that will explain this in great detail. But to give you sort of a quick summary, they are very different things. The JSON schema is a way of defining the validation for the properties you yourself want to include, the values, how you want those validated. Schema.org is a public vocabulary. It's mostly still used for search, and so it's defining, it's presenting a set of values itself that you want to reference if your content is talking about these things. But with JSON schema, you have the ability to structure content your own way and use it, define it yourself, but to have this common definition that anyone who wants to use your content can then see how it's been structured. the interesting wrinkle is that apparently JSON.org has used JSON Schema to do some validation on their own documentation. So they're different. They're not competing with one another. They have some just different roles to them.
Cool. And then we have another one. What parts of the schema do you think are underutilized?
The things that are underutilized currently in JSON Schema, I think there's some new things that have come in. So the JSON Schema has different versions, and I didn't go into this in any detail, but it has been around for about 10 years. So they have different versions. They call them dialects, actually. And so some of the newer versions of JSON Schema have introduced some additional capabilities and keywords. And I noticed when I was doing some research on this, a lot of folks were still using older versions of JSON Schema that wouldn't necessarily have these keywords available to them. So that's an opportunity where there's just some underutilized capability. I expect over time these things will be used more, but for the moment, some of the newer capabilities aren't being used. Yep.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions we have, but people can post questions on this.
Absolutely, yeah, and feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions about this. Please. We have a recording here, so if this is of interest to your organization, feel free to share the recording with others in your organization. And I'm, as I said, very, very excited by the adoption I'm seeing of JSON Schema and definitely the possibilities there are of this. So.
We got one last question, Michael,
Okay.
if you don't mind. It's a pretty long one, so I'll try to
All right.
In a federated model for creating content types where anybody in the org can submit new content types or edits to existing types, do you have any recommendations on how to govern that on the whole at the enterprise content model level so as not to have a duplicate or Frankenstein enterprise content model? Just education and approval process. What part of the org do you recommend manages the prices? Thanks for a great presentation.
That is a terrific question, and it's a obviously someone who asked that is a very sophisticated knowledge of content modeling and how it works and things like that. So yes, I talked about the ability to, for different parts of the organization to develop their own content types and contribute them to the common schema registry. And so you can have some governance around that process. Obviously, it has to get on that schema registry somehow. So you need to set up a process for that. And the key thing you want to look out for is that you don't have any naming collisions. So, if different parts of your organization are using the same word for different purposes, then that's something you want to make sure that you prevent from happening. But I think that's something that is addressable. We can take care of that, and it's not an encumbrance to federating this. I think it's just a question of, you think about the model itself, the content model. It starts off, it's a URI based thing. So you have at the root, you have the full model, and then you have different branches off of that, and you need to figure out where it belongs in that longer URI, who would have, would need that. And, you can separate things if you have different parts of your organization that have, very different needs. You can keep those separate through the management of the URI structure.
One last question, and then we'll stop, Michael. So, are you aware of any CMS that uses or follows JSON schema to allow you to model the data in the system?
Short answer is yes. And the example I showed from a content type did come from an actual CMS. I'm not going to mention that CMS here because while they're using JSON schema, I also don't necessarily agree with all the decisions that they made in their implementation. So I'm not going to point to that as sort of being that they're following necessarily the best practices for content modeling. The thing about JSON schema is that you can still model your content wrong with it. It doesn't necessarily make your content model perfect, but it gives you the ability to get very specific about what's in your content model so that people understand what's there. So I really appreciate the questions, everyone's attention here, and thank you, Akshay, for hosting me again. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
All right.